Funding our heritage. I'm Clarissa Levy, Art and Heritage Counsel at Wedlake Bell.
And I'm Richard Howard. I'm a barrister at 39 Essex Chambers.
And we are joined today by Dame Liz Forgan, DBE. Liz, you've just asked us not to read out the long list of job titles, so I'm just going to pick a few. You have been chair of arts organisations including the Churches Conservation Trust, the Heritage Lottery Fund, Arts Council England, the Guardian Foundation, and I'll stop. But you are also on the board of the Landmark Trust and the Art Fund. And we are so happy that you're joining us today to talk about funding our heritage. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So, first thing that I'm interested to ask you is what heritage funding looked like really before the National Lottery?
Well, the government funded the major museums and local authorities funded a lot of things, and trusts and foundations funded some and private donors funded some. But it was quite clear that it wasn't enough. The state of the major museums in particular, the physical state of them, was getting really shocking. I mean, the staff of the V&A used to have to come in at weekends if it rained because the roof was leaking and they'd come in with buckets. And all of a sudden, there came this brilliant, wonderful idea which transformed everything. It was John Major and the Lottery Fund. And it declared good causes for which the lottery money would be devoted. And absolutely brilliantly, they included heritage as a good cause, which of course was the solution, because if heritage has to argue with kidney machines, it always has to lose. So if you want to fund the heritage, you have to give it a separate fund of its own. Otherwise, it will always come second, third, or fourth to everything else.
So that's how lottery funding for heritage came about. I'm interested to know really what difference that made to how we care for our heritage. I mean, more money, but in what way otherwise was it different?
Well, more money, and that meant that initially there was just a huge job to repair awful backlogs and things like that. But then I was, I think, the third chair of the Heritage Lottery Fund. And as we went on, thinking developed a bit. And I felt very strongly in particular that because lottery money came in a completely different way from government money, i.e. it wasn't taxation, it was individuals going to newsagents and buying lottery tickets. I felt that we needed to have in mind a bigger and different audience than statutory funding. And so we started to think more about what is heritage in those terms. And we came to a pretty broad definition, which went something like the heritage is what people value and care about from their past, which takes you a long way further than stately homes and cathedrals. Don't misunderstand me. Stately homes and cathedrals are absolutely heart of the matter, but it's not all there is. And the Heritage Lottery Fund, I think, did really begin to make everybody think about heritage in a much more embracing way.
Yes, I think we're just supposed to follow up on some of those themes that come out of the fact that it's not taxpayer funding, it's the lottery players coming up with that fund. How has that altered our sort of concept of heritage? Is the heritage now more potentially the sort of the everyday?
Well, I think it is because statutory funding, that's government taxation, obviously has to go to the sort of main bits of the national heritage, which will always tend you to the sort of monumental. But lottery, because it was funded so differently, seemed to me to have a cultural different colour. And so that let us think much more widely about what really heritage meant and what we did value from the past. So it was not just about buildings and monuments. It was landscapes. It was pieces of urban fabric. It was the oral heritage. It was all sorts of things that are terribly important to people in their lives. If you ask them what makes your home, what makes you feel this is your place, they will answer with a huge range of things. I mean, it can range from horrible little plastic toys that they got out of their cornflake packet in the morning because it reminds them of their childhood, to things of great objective beauty and style.
And what sort of things have you seen funded with lottery money that wouldn't have been otherwise?
Well, one of my favourites was in the Western Isles, where the Heritage Lottery Fund began to look at landscapes as a whole. And so they would take a piece of historic landscape and look at everything that was happening in it. And in this case, everything included poets, storytellers, knitters, weavers, and all kinds of seaside plant life, flora and fauna that grew in sand dunes, and a population of birds I'd never heard of called choughs, which apparently are terribly rare and very much prized. So money went into this little place in the Western Isles to support all those things because they were seen as a single cultural unit. So that would never have happened before the Heritage Lottery Fund came along. Never.
One of the principles which was sort of written into the lottery system when it was brought in was the concept of the additionality principle, which, as I've understood it, is that the lottery funds are there for things which the state would not, in the end, pay for, rather than to be used as another means of funding the state in addition to taxation. Doesn't sound like the easiest of lines to draw. How did you deal with that, and does that still survive, really?
Well, Richard, you are right. It was not an easy line to maintain at all. And just to reverse your description of it a little bit, the separations between the statutory funding the government had undertaken to its electorate to provide its duty, and then the lottery, which didn't have any duties at all except what we decided to give it. And you can't blame the politicians. Taxation, terrible. Every time they put the taxes up by a farthing, there's an outcry. And all of a sudden there was this shower of gold willingly appearing every day from lottery players. Naturally enough, the politicians sought to get their fingers on it and just steal a little bit of the lottery to help them out with funding their statutory obligations. I thought it was my job to patrol that line like a lioness and not let them. I succeeded pretty much. But as time went on, pressure on public spending got more and more. And I think that the line has got progressively more fuzzy now as to what is the government's responsibility and what is free for the lottery distributors to distribute.
So in theory, museum professionals should still be going in on rainy weekends to rescue the roof.
Oh, no, there has been a transformation in the physical condition of particularly the national museums. I mean, they're in a glorious state now. I walked around the Natural History Museum 15 years ago, whenever it was, and the place was a complete fire risk. There were Darwin specimens in cardboard boxes. One match, the whole lot would have gone up. The roof of, I say, the V&A and the National Gallery were absolutely not properly in good nick. It was all seriously run down and difficult. But it's not so anymore. I mean, a huge lot of really good work has been done. And once you've got the basic quality of the buildings in particular right, maintenance becomes much more easy to do, and you can afford to do it. So it's all much better than it was, thanks to the lottery.
And now we can invest in choughs. It's wonderful to have that freedom. Did you have any particular favourite projects which you were able to be involved with?
Oh, they changed every week. I loved sorting out the Tweed rivers, where there was a complete civil war going on between the salmon fishermen and the trout fishermen and the canoeists and the mountain bikers, who all wanted something completely different and inimical of this particular piece of the Tweed. And so in the end, we just put a big bag of money in the middle of the table and said, look, there's one condition. You have to go away and agree the plan between you. And they did. And they came up with the most wonderful scheme. The salmon fishermen, and they all respected each other. The canoeists stayed out of the way at breeding time, and we built them a shed to keep their canoes in. The mountain bikers' solution was wonderful. We made a black run for them. And so people came from all across Europe to bike up this black run. And a man started a small business at the top selling puncture kits. That just pleased me a lot.
And the river, that stretch of river was protected and preserved.
Yes.
How absolutely fantastic. So if that's your favourite story of how lottery funding was applied, was there anything that you would change?
Well, I think it was a really good system. I mean, I have so many favourite wonderful things. Christchurch Spitalfields, one of Hawksmoor's absolute masterpieces. We poured money into that. And having poured, that was my fault because I just thought it was most wonderful. But I didn't often shove my board in a particular direction, but I did with that one. And because the lottery put lots of money in it, the last minute we were short of, I think, £5 million or something to finish the job. And I phoned Simon Sainsbury and he sent me a check my return. Now, that was partly because he was a wonderful man, but partly because the lottery had shown such commitment and that he felt confident in responding in that way. So just endless favourites. I think the idea of having a system of funding good causes, particularly cultural good causes, that is at arm's length from the government, I mean, quite seriously arm's length, further arm's length than the Arts Council, is a good one. It's so long as it's very scrupulously administered and there are very clear criteria for the spending of the money and accountability. And I think the record of all the lottery distributors, with the possible exception of the Millennium Commission, which was a bit more patchy, but they were under a ridiculous deadline, January the 1st, which is no good thing. You should never make decisions like that. Anyway, on the whole, the lottery distributors, I think, have been a model of good decisions, publicly accounted for, and open and decent governance. I think they've been a huge success in that way too.
I mean, how arm's length is it from government? Is that quite a firm shove away?
That partly depends on the chair. It's, as I say, it's part of this additionality question. I mean, we wrote our own strategies, and I then fully expected to go and discuss that with the Secretary of State, make sure that it wasn't, I mean, if any particular government had decided we want to put all the money in Scotland or fund redheads or whatever, they were entirely entitled to do that at a strategic level. But after that, once we'd agreed the strategy, I never went back to them, except for social chat and tell them you're keeping them up to date. Very separate. And I think the better for that, because it meant that I could then recruit a board with, in those days, recruitments to cultural boards was very scrupulously done and no fiddling around. But my fiddling around was that I recruited a board as diverse in its attitude to heritage as I possibly could find, with the result that half the board of the Heritage Lottery Fund really thought we should spend all the money rehabilitating Liverpool, and the other half thought we should spend it all on Fabergé eggs and cathedrals. And the joy of it was watching those people educate each other, clash their values, and beat out a really interesting, complicated view of the heritage.
Does that go to the sort of discussion we were having about heritage being more of what people value and, in a sense, what, to a degree, what lottery players value?
Yes, and it's a liberation because the government statutory funding has to look at the key infrastructure of the, I mean, it has to do St Paul's Cathedral and huge monuments of public interest. But that leaves a lot of territory of things that people really, really value. The industrial heritage of Britain, for instance. I mean, one of my sadnesses is that we never really did a proper job on Britain's, I think, biggest deep mine, coal mine, Chatterley Whitfield, which is a most gigantic site. It then had masses of the machinery still there. The mining bars were still there. It was an enormous site on a wonderful open parkland. There is a museum there now, but we just couldn't step up to the scale of commitment that was needed to do a proper job on it. So I'm very sad about that.
We spoke before about the ways that lottery funding can be broader and different from funding which comes from tax. But there are some rules, aren't there? You can't just do anything you want with it. I was thinking in particular of the funding for private individuals who've got property that we all care about, but it belongs to them.
No, there are clear rules. And one of the rules is that you don't give lottery money to private people. You give it to trusts and foundations or public organisations of some sort or another. You don't give it to private people. There was one exception that we made after a lot of thought, because of this idea that we should fund little pieces of the landscape, urban or rural, where individually they weren't great items, but collectively the actual piece of fabric was valuable to people. And if you wanted to do that in a city, you find a little part of a centre of a town with maybe one listed building which you could support, but no others. Then in that context, we would give money to private owners in order for them to restore their houses in a way that was compatible with this piece of precious heritage, i.e. no plastic windows, not funny painting, things like that, so that we preserved the fabric of the city, the little bit of fabric of the city. And that was the one channel where we did actually fund private people through that mechanism, but very tightly controlled.
So otherwise, it was just a question of everyone making up their own ideas of what was important rather than being guided by rules.
Well, we did have quite some rules. We published a strategy, and the strategy included things like, you must show us the value, why it is valuable, whatever it is you want to fund. But then the second condition that we very much imposed upon people was, and now you must show us how you are going to share this thing with people who aren't already in the club. So that could be an educational plan, or it could be sort of a plan of open public activities or something. But you can't just buy a picture and hang it on the wall. You've got to make it work harder to be shared by other people and enjoyed by more people. People complained about that quite a bit sometimes. They thought it was a bit of a nuisance. We are some very famous cathedral, just give us the money and stop asking questions. But the fact is that once you challenge people like that, people who run heritage things are longing to share them with other people. They really want to. And so if you challenge them, they put their creativity to thinking about that, not silly things, not dumbing down, but just thinking of ways that they can make what they do and love more interesting and accessible and attractive to other people. It's a good challenge.
It's getting people out of the way in which they sort of operated historically and run their particular institution to say, well, think about other ways you can actually get more people engaged.
Absolutely. I mean, it goes from the biggest to the smallest. I mean, St. Paul's Cathedral wanted some money and they needed it. But we were really worried that the Triforium needed restoration. And we wanted to fund it. But at the moment we were asked for the money, no public access could be found to it because there was only one way up and it wasn't safe. And so after lots of negotiation, we found a solution to that. And I think that was the most glorious piece of investment by the Heritage Lottery Fund because it gave you access to a part of the cathedral that was terribly exciting, and you could go and look at Wren's library in a way that you couldn't before. So my favourite education and outreach challenge there was when we gave the National Gallery a huge amount of money to buy Raphael's Madonna of the Pinks. And there was a bit of, why do we want another old master? Why we got plenty of Raphaels? Why do we want this one? And anyway, I thought it was really important. Everybody loved the painting. And we thought it filled all the rules, so we did. About a year later, I got a phone call from someone at the National Gallery saying, I know that you were all a bit sceptical about whether we were going to fulfill your condition of using this picture to work harder than just hanging it on the wall. So I thought you might like to come and see what's happening at half term. And I did. And they had got an artist working with artists and making lots of things. And then an enchanting room of small children who'd been taken to see this picture and then asked to draw it. And some of them were very good. Some of them were babies and they were just blotches of colour. But the one thing that sprang out of all of them was that you could see that they had understood the relationship between the mother and the child, even if they were just two blotches of colour. And the other thing I noticed was that they had all seen and noticed that in the top right-hand corner of that picture, there is, as there often is in an old master, a little distant landscape. And they'd all noticed it and put it in their pictures. And I thought they looked at that picture. They really understood that picture, even if they were 4 years old and couldn't draw. So I thought, that's good. That's wonderful. That's just what we wanted to happen.
How absolutely amazing. And so the landscape now of our heritage is different than it would otherwise have been if it weren't for the lottery. I've got before me the number of £9.2 billion, which has been spent on over 52,000 projects. Doesn't seem hardly possible.
Well, it's amazing, isn't it? I sometimes used to dream of finding a way of attaching a balloon to every single thing that Lottery had funded, and then we'd fly over the top of it and take a picture of Britain, this gorgeous, wonderful investment in things that make people really happy.
one of the sweetest things in a preliminary discussion before this recording, when we were talking about how heritage funding was provided, you said there should be a John Major Day. And that sticks with me.
Honestly, what a wonderful decision. And he doesn't get nearly enough credit for it, including from me. He rang me up once and said he was interested in some project or other, and what about lottery funding? And I said, I'm very sorry, Mr. Major, but it's just not eligible. And I felt terrible. I don't think he was best pleased, but the next time we met, he was extremely friendly. So I think he's heroic. I think that single decision would justify anybody's time as Prime Minister.
So, Liz, a last question. How would you say heritage funding across the country looks now?
Well, I think there's one really serious problem, and that is that local authorities, which have been absolutely key to the funding of heritage and culture at large, are under such pressure that their money is literally disappearing. Their people are cancelling cultural budgets, and you could understand why. And that is a real headache. I don't know what we're going to do about that, but it's a broader question. The lottery is still wonderful. Let us pray that the heritage continues to be a good cause, because I suppose a government could declare a different set of good causes if it wanted to. Let us pray that the government manages to keep its support for heritage and culture at some decent level despite everything else. But local authorities are the real danger, and we are going to miss their funding like anything because they're hugely important.
Do you mean potential closure of local museums?
It's happening. It's happening already. And collections are being mothballed, visiting times are being reduced. And it's not their fault. They have statutory priorities that they absolutely must put first. And it puts them in an impossible position.
Well, perhaps that's going to be our priority when the next lottery event occurs. Let's hope so. Liz, thank you so much. It's really fascinating to hear about how lottery funding has changed everything, rescued everything, and expanded the heritage that we have access to. And it's been an absolute delight chatting. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Art and Heritage Law Contested Heritage. Please do follow or subscribe on Apple or Spotify podcasts to enjoy more shows.
We have a new podcast out every fortnight. If you're able, please take the time to rate us and put down a review.
The show is also on the 39 Essex Chambers website, along with podcast series on topics such as artificial intelligence, climate change and planning.